I pray, God, that for anybody who this week, their week has kind of got them off kilter, has kept them from really connecting with you, that God, this morning would be a time for them to just come back home to you. Know that your arms are wide open, just waiting for them. And God, I pray specifically that you'd help us reconnect with our purpose in you and what it is that you created us for. I love you, Jesus. It's in your name that I pray. Amen. So how many of you just absolutely love driving in the big city? Anybody in here love it? Yeah, a few of you, you crazies. How many of you hate driving in the big city? Anybody? Yeah, this is why you live in Oswego, right? No traffic. Takes you 2 minutes to get anywhere you want to go. I kind of am in the middle. I'm kind of midsies on it. But what I really do genuinely hate is getting lost in a big city. Does anybody hate that? I mean, you just feel silly, right? You're like driving around, you're the small town guy who's looking like this over your steering wheel, you're leaning forward, and everybody's driving around you real fast and honking at you, and you're just like, oh, is this right? Oh, where do I turn? I hate that feeling more than just about anything. I was on a missions trip with my teenagers back when I was a youth pastor out in Garden City. And we were going down to Houston, Texas to go work in the inner city. It was a great trip. We went and worked with homeless people. We worked with gangbangers. We just kind of worked with a whole myriad of different people. And these kids from Western Kansas got to experience just an entirely different culture than what they were used to. Well, we were going down, and on the way down to this mission trip, we decided from Garden City that Dallas would be a good place for us to do our layover and kind of spend the night. So we pull into Dallas, we get there, and I follow the guy from the church that we're going to stay at. He takes us to the church, we drop all our stuff off, and we go down into downtown Dallas. We go look where JFK got shot. You know, the kids reenact all that. And we eat I don't know why they did. They're teenagers, okay? We go down and we go down to this restaurant that served alligator, and I was like, I dared all the kids to order alligator, so everybody blew all their money eating alligator, and we just had a blast. And we get back in the vans, and we stayed out a little later than we had planned on, and I'm driving one. We have about 30 kids with us, and somebody else, maybe 20, somebody else is driving another 15-passenger church van, and we start heading back to the church. Now, I'm joking with the kids, and I'm having fun, and we're getting closer and closer to where I think we're supposed to turn off to get to the church, and then it hits me. I didn't pay attention whatsoever to where the church was. Have you ever had this moment? I followed the guy, I watched the guy, I listened to the guy talk about where the church was, but none of it registered up here. I was totally lost. So I start taking my best guess. I kind of take a stab in the dark, and I turn right onto this kind of one of those tollways. I knew that we had gone on a tollway in Dallas. And have you been on a Dallas tollway? Has anybody been on these? They're nuts. Like every 20 feet, you're throwing in like 75 cents or something. And it's just, at least at this time, it was the toll booth that just had the little basket, and you had to be a Michael Jordan to get it in, you know? And so this was back in the days before GPS and before credit card machines were in the toll booths. So I am driving every like 20 feet, I'm throwing 75 cents in a machine, and then you keep driving. And I finally get to where I'm fairly certain the turnoff was for the church. I turn off, and I start driving down the back streets, and I'm not letting anybody in on the fact that Kent knows not where he's going, you know? I am driving, and I'm like, yeah, we'll be at the church soon, kids, don't you worry. And I'm looking down the streets, and I'm going slow, and I'm pretending to like give, tour guides. I'm like, well, this is where JFK ate breakfast before that morning, you know? I'm just making up stuff to keep people off my back. I don't know where the church is. I flip around, I come back, we get back on the toll road, and we start driving the other way. 75 cents. 75 cents. We keep going. Finally, the adult woman who was driving I'm like 25 at the time. The adult woman who was driving the van behind me, she radios me because we had walkie-talkies, and she says, over, Kent. And I'm like, over, this is Kent for go. And she says, do you have any clue where you're going? Right? And of course I lied, and I was like, oh yeah, I know where. No, I didn't lie. I was like, I have no idea where I'm going. Do you know? And she said, well, yeah, I think it's up this way. So she takes off in front of me on the toll road, and she starts going, and we go over one of those big interchanges, the ones where you go up like 75 feet, and you're looking off the side thinking you're going to die. And we do this loop, and I'm like looking out over the horizon, trying to see if I can see the church. It was a big church. I'm looking to see if I can see the church. I see nothing. She takes us down. We pay 75 cents, 75 cents. We keep paying 75 cents. I am starting to take money from the children in my van, all right? That's how bad it's getting. I'm like, pony up, kids, and we're throwing 75 cents in. We're going, and she doesn't know where she's at either, which makes me feel way better. You know, isn't it funny how somebody, like, their incompetence can validate your incompetence? And she totally validates my incompetence. And I'm looking, and I can't find the church anywhere. Finally, I'm like, I think it's this turn. We've taken every other turn that we could possibly take. We take this turn, and we come up over this hill, and over the top of the hill, it's like the angels start singing from heaven. And I see this steeple with a cross on top of it, and I am 95% certain that it is the church. You know what I'm saying? I'm looking, and then there it is in front of me, the last toll booth. We pull up to the toll booth. I reach deep into my pockets. There is nothing left. I've drained those bad boys dry. I start asking the kids, does anybody else have 75 cents? Literally, kids are like digging through their purses. I'm yelling at them, dig faster! You know, there's people behind me. They're digging through. Kids are pulling through their pockets, and every one of them goes, we gave you all of our change. And I had this dilemma as a youth pastor. I sat there at the toll booth, and I thought, what do I do? Right there is my destination. Right there is my goal. Right there it is. And I'm stuck at this toll booth without any money. You know what I did? I ran it. I just drove right through it, baby. I figured they could take a picture of my license plate and send me a bill. Because we had to get home. Have you ever known that feeling? You had to get home. You just have to. And I don't advocate breaking the law. I legitimately was hoping they would send me a bill because I didn't know what else to do. There was no other way for us to get through. And it's the only way home. But I hate that feeling of being lost and feeling like you don't know how to get home. You don't know how to get to the place that you're supposed to go, right? And once you do figure out where you're going to go, if you're like me, you're going to do whatever it takes to get there, yeah? This morning, my guess is that some of you in your lives feel a little bit lost like that. You feel like you're driving back and forth and you're paying out resource over time, resource after resource after resource, and it is taking a toll on you. It is taking resources out of you and you don't know what to do. I'll tell you, I personally have experienced this in my own life. Here's ways that I've experienced it before. I was in my early 20s, I was working for a church. I thought I was doing fairly well. I went over to a buddy's house for Thanksgiving, and we started talking, and he said, tell me, how are things going? I start sharing with him how things are going. This guy was a year younger than me, and hopefully you've identified with this. I start sharing with him how things are going, and then I say, so how are things going for you? And my buddy starts to talk, and I find out that he has moved up into the top levels of this multi-million nationwide company. And he now gets to fly to Australia to meet with bigwigs across the world. And he's going to New York City and eating in restaurants where, like, you know, my monthly paycheck wouldn't be able to afford to eat there. And he is doing all of this great, fantastic stuff and meeting all of these great, fantastic people. And guess what happens to Kent's old plain Jane life? I go from feeling like I'm up here to feeling like I'm down here. And all of a sudden, the veil that kind of clouds and shrouds my life that says, Kent, you're just okay, you're doing everything okay, starts to wane and it starts to be pulled back. And I start to feel like I'm really missing out on something. All of a sudden, the lostness in my life gets revealed for what it is. Have you felt that moment? Some of it's a twinge of jealousy, but some of it is an honest angst in your life that you were meant for something greater, you were meant for something more, and maybe, just maybe, you're not fulfilling your purpose in life. Would you agree? It's not all jealousy. Sometimes it comes where things are going okay, and you're just doing great, life is okay, your family's good, you're good, and then you meet somebody. Have you met the person who has had the epiphany where their life has just completely changed? Everything has just turned around, and the birds, when they hear the birds chirping, they hear God's voice, and you're like, I just hear birds, I don't, you know, and they're walking around, and their whole life has changed, and all of a sudden you go from feeling pretty good about yourself to feeling like you're missing out on something. You're like there's something that was supposed to be inside of you that you don't see, and you can't see it, and you don't know what's going on. See, I have a goal for this morning, and my goal is this. I would like to, for a moment, pull the veil back in our lives on the existential angst. That's a big word, but there is existential just means kind of self-reflective, self-evaluating. I'd like to pull back the veil this morning, and I'd like us to just for a moment embrace the existential angst. You see, most of us don't actually allow ourselves to feel that angst until there's some kind of trial that goes on in your life. You're at work and everybody's coming under inspection. Something's happened. You don't know what it is. There are meetings happening behind closed doors. You're going through a big trial. And all of a sudden, your life is in chaos and you start to self-evaluate. You actually slow down for a moment to evaluate what's going on the inside. Some of us, it's not a trial. Some of us, it's a transition. You move to a new place. You maybe got a different job. Things shift up in your life. Your kids leave home. I don't know what it is, but there's a big transition that occurs in your life. A spouse passes away, and all of a sudden, you're in the middle of this incredible emotional, evaluative state in your life of just dealing with this existential angst. Some of you, it's a tragedy. And you lost somebody that was close to you, and it all of a sudden just throws all this stuff in your face. And you listen, I want to be honest with you. Most of us, if we were to deal with this 24 hours a day, I think it is somewhat a gift from God that we don't just deal with it constantly, where we don't just constantly have to deal with the angst in our life, deal with the existential, that kind of self-reflective angst that goes on inside of us. But I am telling you, if you hide from it forever, there will be a day where there will be a reckoning for it. You see, in our culture right now, lots of us are finding ways to kind of put up a veil for us to hide from the angst, right? So some of you, it might be your schedule, your busyness. Any of you just love to have a schedule. You love having everything, yes, thank you. You get up at this time, you have your coffee, you brush your teeth, you've eaten your breakfast before that. You are doing all your stuff. The bed is made. You're just getting in gear and you're going and you just keep it going. And as long as everything's going like that, everything's fine. And you know what? It's not bad, but do you know what it does to you? It causes this veil to go up. And you can live your life without ever having to evaluate because you think that you've got everything in order. You think that you've got it all figured out until you hit a tragedy, a trial, or a transition, right? And then all of a sudden, there goes your schedule. Some of you, it's working hard and if I can work hard and I can keep everybody around me working hard, I can keep the veil up. Some of you, it's your family. I think for me, sometimes the veil comes from my family, and I do not mean this in any one iota in a bad way. What I mean is that having 4 kids can be very exhausting and very time-consuming, and there is rarely time for Jenny and I to just step back and self-reflect, Tell me you haven't experienced that. It is hard for us to find time to just reflect on who God wants us to be and who we're supposed to be and what am I supposed to be doing. And some of you, one of these things, I think this is the antidote for Americans right now to existential angst. It is the thing that you can put up as a veil to keep you from having to deal with anything. When I was single till I was 27, and I did not have one of these devices because they had not been invented before. What I had was one of these. Did anybody have one? And it flipped open, yeah? And you felt like you were in Star Trek, yeah? Huh? Pretty awesome, right? You're like, Captain Kirk, beam me up, Scotty, right? It was awesome. And then these things came out. See, when I was single, you didn't have one of these. So when I went to a restaurant by myself, do you know what I did? I sat there like this. Trying to not look creepy, right? But that probably looks kind of creepy, doesn't it? Right? That's what I did. Do you know what you can do now if you're single and you're at a restaurant? Do you know what I was thinking about the whole time? How lonely I was. How I wish that I had people around me. How I wished I wasn't at a restaurant by myself. Now, when I've gone to, and I have people in my life, right? But I'm very much a people person. And so when I go to restaurants by myself now, do you know what I do? Right? And do you know why? Because I can throw up this veil. And it gives me a sense of being connected to people, doesn't it? It's like a false sense of being connected to real people. I can really read these crazy stories about your lives. But I just read the parts that you're willing to share with me, right? And I feel connected, but at the same time, I am more disconnected than ever. Because if you were to come up and a real live person talk to me, I might be like, just a second, right? A real live person waiting to talk to you. And you're going, just a second. I just need to, if I can just, hold on. This thing I think, allows us to throw up a veil and keep this existential angst at bay. And don't you want to? Don't you want to? Don't you not want to have to deal with the problems in your life? Don't you not want to have to deal with the insecurities? Because if you did, you might actually come to the point where you would ask the question, what on earth am I here for? Why do I even exist? What's my purpose? Here's the deal. You will have to pay the piper someday. I know this not because I have lived to the age where I have had to pay the piper, but I watched my granddad pay the piper. He had lived his life. He was a very successful man, was an engineer, had a wife, kids, lived life very well, and he was a good guy, even had accepted Jesus. But after my grandma passed away, my granddad had never really dealt with who he was supposed to be, why in the world he was here. And my granddad began to spiral out of control. Because you see, all of a sudden, all the things that were a veil for him, all the things that kept him from having to deal with that question had been removed. He just was home alone in a room by himself, and all he could deal with was the question, and he didn't have an answer for it. In his mind, I didn't think he was too old to answer it. Let me say that for you. If you're struggling with this, if you feel that pressure inside of you of, I don't know what I'm good for anymore. He felt like that. My granddad couldn't hear anymore. So he thought he couldn't engage with people because he couldn't hear. He was totally isolated. And my granddad, all of a sudden, all he could face was this, who am I? What on earth am I here for? See, my guess is that most of you have that question deep inside of you, but most of you right now are just simply existing. And my fear for you is someday, the veil that you have put up, the walls that you have put up are going to be stripped away from you. And you are going to have to face this. So better face it now than face it later when you feel like you're past the point where you can. I will just say, I do not believe that any person, I think my granddad still had tremendous value. He just couldn't see it because he couldn't figure out the answer to the question. Does that make sense? Some of you know the result with my granddad. It was not a pretty thing. It was not a pretty thing. I'm not going to go into it because one of my children is in here. This morning, we're going to, in just a moment, jump to Exodus, and then we're going to jump to 2 Corinthians. If you want to kind of open your Bibles to 2 Corinthians, we're going to get there. What I'd like you to do is kind of have this be a two-fisted sermon, all right? So with one fist, I'm going to ask you to hold on to your existential angst for me, all right? I want you to let that question really pervade your soul a little bit. What am I here for? What on earth am I here for? I want you to really let that get into your soul a little bit, all right? So hold on to that with one hand. And in the other hand, I want to present kind of an idea, and then I'm going to tie those two things together. So can you hold on? Can you pause and really get that going inside of yourself? Here we go. It is this event that we're going to look at in Exodus happened thousands of years ago. Thousands of years ago, this event happened. There was a guy named Moses. He was raised in a palace, and he was raised by the Pharaoh's daughter. He was raised to experience all of the best of life. You know what I mean? He sat at dinners with kings and queens. Moses he experienced having wealth beyond all measure. Anything that you could imagine, Moses had it at his beck and call. Moses was also of Israelite birth. He was a Hebrew by birth. His mom had put him in some water. You might know this story. She had floated him in the river. I think she probably knew that the princess took a bath in the river. And the princess is taking a bath, sees Moses, grabs Moses, takes him, raises him as her own. And she, lo and behold, asks Moses' mother to kind of help be a wet maid for her, to nurse Moses, to raise him. Moses probably would have been nursing likely up until close to the age of 5. That was kind of, back in those days, you nursed the child as long as you possibly could, all right? So here's what I want you to get. I can't prove it because the text doesn't talk about this, but I do think, just based on cultural norms, that Moses likely grew up in his Hebrew family, right? But he knew that he had a connection to the kingdom of Egypt. So Moses would have lived in these two weird realities of living in the family of a slave, but being kind of noble orientation. Does that make sense? I think his real parents probably would have told him stories about Yahweh God. I think he would have heard about Abraham. I think he would have heard about Isaac and Jacob and Jacob coming to Egypt. I think he would have heard about the Promised Land. We fast forward in Moses' life closer to the end of it than to the beginning. Moses has killed a man in Egypt because this guy was beating up a slave of Hebrew origin. And so Moses kills the Egyptian who beat up the slave, and Moses runs for his life out into the desert. He has come back because God has called him to go free his people. All right, everybody caught up on the story? Moses goes, he frees his people from the Egyptians through incredible events. If you haven't read this, go back to Exodus, and just these events are incredible. God is working. God is falling. God is working in Moses' life. And when he brings Moses out into the desert, and these people out with him, and Moses goes up onto a mountain, all right? Moses goes up onto the mountain, and God is going to give him the 10 Commandments. Have you ever seen the movie The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston? Yes. Let my people go, right? He's got 10 Commandments written on stone, these stone tablets. Moses is going to bring them down and give them to the people. And this is what's important, I think, to know. These people had been slaves. Up until this point, they had never been in charge of their own life. Somebody else had always been their master. And God now, knowing that these people are slaves, is going to give them the law, and it is going to become a new master to them. It is going to tell them what's right and wrong. You need to know, God's law was never intended to just keep us from having fun. It's kind of the way people like to portray it in these days. It was really a way for us to understand what God's best was for us. Make sense to you? Moses goes up. This is one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. He goes up on the mountain. He's going to get the 10 Commandments, and he says this to God. Exodus 33 says this. I want to see your glory. Show me your glory, God. You imagine this? Moses has been talking to him. God has been kind of veiling himself up until this point. And he says, just show me your glory, God. I just want to see it. I just want to see it. And this is what God says to him. It's one of my favorites. He says, look, Moses, if you see my face, you're going to die. Anybody who sees my face is going to die, all right? But he says this, here's what I'll do. I'll let you get in a rock. I'll put you in a rock. I will put my hand over it, and then I will walk past you, and I will let you see my backside, all right? And you can see my backside, because if you see that, you're not going to die. If you see my face, you're going to die, but you can at least see the back part of my glory, all right? So God puts Moses in a cave. He puts his hand over it. He walks past him, takes his hand off. Moses sees it, and we get to Exodus 34, 29 through 30, and it says this, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai and the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hand, he was not aware, listen to this, that his face was radiant because he had spoken to the Lord. Moses' face is glowing like a glow stick on Halloween. You know what I mean? Just, he's glowing. He had not realized that his face was radiant because he'd spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. Now, if you continue to read this story, it's just kind of a short passage in the Old Testament. What you would find is that Moses will put a veil over his face, and he will cover his face so that when people look at him, they don't see the glory. They can actually have a conversation with him. Does this make sense to you? Now, we're going to take that story. You needed to know it so you can understand what Paul is talking about in 2 Corinthians, all right? We're going to go to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12 through 18. I want to read a little portion of this. We'll talk about it a little bit, and we'll keep going, all right? Here's what Paul says. Therefore, since we have such a hope, we are very bold. Now, he's been talking about how Moses had the veil on his face and how we now have a different type of ministry because of Jesus coming into the world. And so he's saying, since we have such a hope, we are very bold. Our hope is different. It's not like the old covenant. Does this make sense to you? It's not like the old law. This is a whole new thing. We are not like Moses, who had put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away. Now, what you have to know is that Paul has this idea, and if you read before this in verses 11 and up a little bit ahead of this, you would find that Paul has an idea that he thinks Moses is not just trying to keep people from seeing the glory, but that the glory is fading from his face. Right? You've had a glow stick. This is one of the most depressing things for my children is they pop the glow stick, and that night they are playing with it. They're like Dance Party USA. It's like, woo! And they're going crazy with the glow stick. And the next morning they come out, and all they want to do is play with the glow stick. And they go and they turn the light off, and they're like, oh, right? You've seen this before, right? Oh, because the glow stick is losing its glow. It's not as brilliant and bright. Paul thinks that Moses has put the veil over his face because he wants to hide the fact. He uses the word, in the NIV they say transitory, other versions say faded. The glow on his face, the radiance of his face is fading away. It's fading away. And that he's hiding the fact that the glory is disappearing. Listen to what he says in verse 14. But their minds, the Israelites, were made dull, for to this day the same veil remains. So Paul is making this argument that the glory is faded away from the old covenant. He's saying to this day the same veil remains when the old covenant is read. It has not been removed, because only in Christ is it taken away. Even to this day Moses is read and a veil covers their heart. Paul is making a simple argument here. He is making the argument that the old covenant was kind of good for what it was good for. It was a don't do and a do list, right? Don't do these things, you'll be okay, you'll get to God. But he's saying that covenant could not completely fulfill the glory of God, right? It couldn't give you what Moses found on the mountain. All that Moses had was a faded version of what he had seen. It was slowly fading away, and he says that the same is true about the rules of don't do and do. The do not and do not taste, do not touch, do not handles of the Old Testament, those things can never show you the glory of God. They can't. They're fading away. You need something more. And I would say to you, none of you probably are of Hebrew origin. Maybe a few of you have some Jewish heritage in you. Great if you do. But most of you probably don't fit under this, like when he says when the law is read. Probably most of you don't go to synagogue and have the law read to you, right? Every single week. And you hear the Old Testament, you hear the Ten Commandments. But I want to tell you something. Most of you do know the do not do's and the do's, right? Most of you know right and wrong. And I want to tell you that what Paul is saying to these people is completely applicable to you as well. That it is not enough. The right and wrongs, you cannot be good enough. You cannot be good enough to get and attain the glory of God. There is a veil that covers the heart of those who are trying to get to God just by simply being good people. By not doing and doing. You can't be good enough. Do you get it? There is a veil that covers your heart, that keeps you from seeing who God really is. Now listen to this. Verse 16. But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. Isn't that good stuff? Whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. The thing that keeps you from seeing who God is and how powerful He is and the kind of change and transformation He can make in your life, that stuff disappears when you turn to God. The veil is removed. It's open up and you see clearly who you could be and who He is. And in light of all that, stuff starts to change. I love it. It kind of reminds me of the show Fixer Upper. Has anybody seen the show Fixer Upper? Has anybody seen it? Oh man, it's on Netflix if you have it. You should go watch that's Jenny and I watched the first season. Fixer Upper, it's Chip and Joanna Gaines. And I think I like it because Jenny says I'm kind of like Chip on it, and he's really funny. So I'm like, yeah, like that show. But this couple, Chip and Joanna, they go and they take a house that is think of the worst house that you can possibly think of in Oswego. The one that you're like, oh, I wish nobody saw that one, right? All right? Maybe it's yours. I don't know. Just think of the house the house that's just in disrepair. It's horrible. They should probably just tear it down. This is the house that Chip and Joanna Gaines go with a couple, and they buy that house. They go in, and they buy it for dirt cheap, and then this couple goes in, and they remodel it. The people who are actually going to own the house can't see any of the changes are made until the final product is done, right? So Chip and Joanna, they go in and they remodel and they paint and they strip stuff out and they get rid of dead raccoons and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's a crazy show. They totally take everything out and they change and transform this whole house. And when they're done, they have the big reveal. And it's kind of like a lot of these shows, they bring the couple in, and the couple comes up, and they're holding hands. They're like, they have to keep their eyes closed, right? So they're all nervous, and they're like, oh, I can't wait. And they're like, you guys ready to see the house? And they're like, oh, I just want to see it. And they tell them, okay, open your eyes. And the couple opens their eyes, and they all go like this, right? Here's why. If you've seen the show, at least the first season, I don't know if they kept doing this, you know that what they really have is Chip and Joanna have taken a big, huge picture of the people's original house before any changes were made. And they put it on kind of a canvas print, and it's in this big whatever the word is called, frame, and it's on wheels, and Chip and Joanna are on either sides of the frame. And so when the people open their eyes, all they see is the old house. All they can see is what it used to look like. And then, I love this part, Chip and Joanna say, are you guys ready to see what your house looks like now? And the people are like, yeah, we want to see it. And they grab the frame and they start to pull it apart. And as they do, I love this. The couples almost always just begin to cry. Because they see this transformation of something that was dead and broken and was useless to all of a sudden being beautiful. A place that you would want to call home. Listen to what Paul says, because I think this is the turnaround for us. There was this veil when you thought that everything was about just right and wrong, do and don't do. There's a veil over you. You can't see God when you're in the middle of that. This is what happens when you turn to the Lord. The veil is taken away. He says, verse 17, now the Lord is Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. I feel like Paul is saying that veil is taken away, and all of a sudden when the Spirit comes into your life, because when you've turned to the Lord, that you get the Spirit of the Lord, and He brings freedom. Tell me that you don't need some freedom in your life. Tell me you don't need some freedom from guilt. Tell me you don't need freedom from the pressures of this world. The pressures to perform, the pressures to be perfect, the pressures to have it all together. Tell me you don't need some freedom from shame. Some of you have and are continue to engage in some shameful activity. Tell me you don't need freedom from that. Tell me you don't need freedom from the sin. Sin is just wrongdoing. The corruption that has taken control of your heart. Tell me you don't need freedom. Tell me you don't need freedom. Do you see the big reveal? When you turn to Christ, it is not just a list of do's and don'ts. It is freedom in Him. It is hope. It is new life. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon you and your life transforms. Listen to this, verse 18. Let's go to that. Verse 18. Do we have it? That's all right, I can read it because I have it. It says this, and we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into His image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Listen to that again. We all who with unveiled faces, if you have turned to the Lord, the veil has been removed, right? He just said that. If you turn to the Lord, your veil has been removed. You've been given the Spirit, and now there's a freedom in your life. And He says this, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory. He is saying, you get to do the same thing Moses did. You get to contemplate, you get to look at the Lord's glory and see it for yourself. This is the power of having a relationship with Jesus Christ, the Lord God Almighty. That you get to contemplate the Lord's glory, and this is what happens when you do that. You are being transformed into His image with ever-increasing glory yourself, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. There is kind of a twofold thing that happens when you turn to the Lord. You get freedom and you get transformed. You get freedom and you get transformed. And this is so much better, folks. It's so much better than a list of do's and don'ts. Because do's and don'ts do not have the power to really transform you, right? Doesn't mean that we have the right to just go out and do anything that we want. We don't use our freedom as a cover-up for evil, is how the Bible would say it. It means that I am being transformed into the likeness of Christ by simply spending my energy contemplating who He is and what He has done and how He's working in my life. Contemplating the glory of God will transform you. That's powerful. Who doesn't need some transformation in their life? Remember the existential angst at the beginning? You held it with one hand and I told you to hold on to it. Can I just say something to you? You have been given a mighty purpose in this life already. You have already been given a mighty purpose, and it is to join with the Lord in His work, to be a leader in His kingdom. Yeah? Do you know in 2 Corinthians 5, later on, Paul will say that you are called to be ambassadors for Christ. Think about it. Ambassadors, it's again one of my favorite verses. I think I've brought it up maybe 3 times since I've been here. Ambassadors for Christ. And the idea is that God is making His plea to the world through you. Can you imagine that for a moment? Just imagine for a moment that the God of the universe would make His plea through you. I don't know if I can even really fathom it. I don't know if I can fathom the idea that God would choose me, in the midst of all of the time that the world has existed and the people have existed, God chose this breath that I live within. There's Kent. That's it in all of humanity. Yet God is choosing me. God is choosing you. He wants a relationship deeply with you because He wants to impact the world from the inside out. This is one of the things that, again, I've said it a bunch, I think is one of the coolest things about the gospel is that God didn't come and wipe it all out and start over. That's what He did with Noah. You know that story, maybe you don't. Go read it. He wiped it out and started over. This time, when He sent Jesus, He didn't wipe it out and start over. He wiped out sin. He wiped out the wrongdoing. And He started with a new man in Jesus. And He infected the human race, one by one, with the good news, with the gospel, with healing of our souls from the inside out, where all of the wrong that you've done is transformed into something that's right. All of the bad that you've ever done is think some of you have done such bad stuff. True or false? True, right? God Himself is taking that bad and He is transforming it into a new life where only good can happen and reside. That's so powerful. That's hope. That's freedom. That's transformation, isn't it? Isn't it? He already has a purpose for you. You're to be His workers in the world. You are to be the ones taking the kingdom of righteousness to all those that you work around. I'm going to tell this story because the couple isn't here, so I can. I talked with somebody recently who said that they have seen a change in somebody in our church. And so they've started thinking about coming to our church because of it. They are not thinking about coming to our church because Kent's a good preacher. He dances around like a funny monkey up there. They're not coming to our church because the worship's great. It is good. It's great. They're not coming to our church because we're all the best people in the whole world or we've got the free meal on Wednesday night or whatever it is. They're not coming to our church because of that. You know why they're coming to our church? Thinking about coming to our church? Because there is somebody in our church who has decided that they are an ambassador for Christ. They have already taken up the helm of following Jesus and their life has changed. They have been transformed as they've connected with God. And as they've transformed the people around, I loved the guy that I talked with said, I've just been watching him. He doesn't really know it. I've been watching him. And I've seen the change in his life. And I just keep thinking, how do I get that in my life? And I thought, that is it. That's what following Jesus should be like. It should not be something that stays on Sunday morning. What a joke if it just stays on Sunday morning. It should follow you into Monday morning. It should follow you into Tuesday all the way through Friday. And it should change everything about you so that people looking at you go, there is something so different about that person. And I want to know what it is. This person has followed the trail back to our friend going to church. And it is not church, folks. It is the living Savior, Jesus Christ. That's stinking powerful. You have a purpose already. When will you stand up and become the person who owns it? This is what I always wished for my granddad. I told him, I said, Granddad, you know what? I know you can't hear anything. What if you just wrote letters to little kids in your church and told them you were praying for them? He wouldn't grab onto it. He was so consumed by the question because he had ignored it for so many years that he couldn't grab a hold of the answer. That God wanted him to just simply be an ambassador in His world. I know some of you are saying to yourself, but Kent, I'm not a pastor. Kent, I'm not perfect. How do I even do that? I will give you what I think is a helpful solution. Here it is. Stop asking God, what in the world am I here for? He has already answered that. He has already said, you have a purpose. You're to be my ambassador in this world. If you're not a Christ follower, my heart goes out to you because you have no purpose. You are completely missing it because God's purpose is to redeem the human race. And He wants to do it through other humans, other people. And so if you're a Christ follower, you have incredible amounts of purpose. You have incredible amounts of purpose. Here's the answer. Don't ask the question, what on earth am I here for? What am I supposed to be doing? The question you need to be asking is, God, where are you working? And how can I join you? God, where are you working? I want you to realize when we talk about +1 living in here, it is not some fake program that you're supposed to go do because the church says to do it. This is just simple discipleship. Like, I'm going to look for somebody around me who's not very close to Jesus or not as close as I am, or I'm not saying that in an arrogant way, but I'm going to look for them and I'm going to just start to pray about having influence in their life. I'm going to pray about trying to be an influencer in their world. That's it. That's all the idea is, that you would bring +1s along with you in the kingdom. I want to ask you to stop asking what your purpose is. God's already answered it. And I want to encourage you to start looking for where God is working and joining him there. There was a woman who should have gone down as just a blip in history. Her name was Drana. I can't pronounce her last name, so I'm not even going to pretend to. She lived in northern Macedonia in the early 1900s. And Drana was an interesting woman. She had 3 children and a husband who was fairly well off. He was kind of in the construction industry. And her husband passed away tragically. Some people even said it was for political reasons, that somebody had killed him. Nobody really knew what happened. But all we know is that Drana was left with 3 young children, and she had to raise them on her own. And she was just well enough off that she could kind of make it. But she wasn't rich. Does that make sense to you? Drana was one of those women who should have just, you know them, right? They live, they work hard, they try to make it, they do the best with what they've got, they try to make it through life, and that's all they can do. But Drana decided to look for where God was already working. And she began to invite the poor in her city to come over and eat with her family. And so every night she would cook a meal, they'd bring the poor in, she'd bring a few people in. It wasn't like she brought everybody. She'd bring a few people in, they would eat together, and they would, as a family, and then the people would leave. And that was kind of what she did. She made it her mission to just feed people who didn't have food. And I want to read something that she said to her daughter, because her daughter asked her about it one day. And this is what she said to her. She said, "My child, never eat a single mouthful unless you're sharing it with others." Isn't that challenging? Never eat a single mouthful unless you're sharing it with others. Drana got it, right? She understood that the idea was for us to be ambassadors, to look at where God is already moving, and then just say, okay, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to put some energy and see if God doesn't bless that. It's not go out and start some big ministry. It's just, I eat dinner, I could invite somebody over to eat with me. Wherever it is that God's working, right? Now here's the deal. Drana should have just been a blip on the highway of life. Nobody would even know her name probably, except that the daughter who asked her the question became somebody of some influence in the world. Her daughter ended up going to India, and she started helping out the poor in India, partially because of the influence of her mom. She began to make a difference in their lives, and she started eventually to work with the very poorest of the poor in India. This woman really should have been a blip as well, but she started helping lepers in India, people who were, and not just lepers, but people who were on their last leg. They were dying, they were dead, they were gone. And she gave these people their last moments in life dignity. She would wash their bodies. She would carry them from one place to another and give them a place to die in dignity, and she would share God's love with them. You and I know this woman by the name Mother Teresa. See, Mother Teresa eventually had the influence. You know that she sat at the table with presidents. And I've heard stories of Mother Teresa chastising presidents. Can you imagine her being like, you guys shouldn't be doing that. You know what I mean? She sat at the table with popes. This woman influenced the world. Her mother never had the influence that she had. Her mother could never have imagined it, right? You know what her mother did? She just was faithful to God with what she had been given. Folks, I'm not advocating that you need to go out and change the world and be a Mother Teresa. What I am advocating is that you have no idea how God might want to use you. And if you ignore His purpose in your life, and you think it's just about making money, and you think it's just about raising a good, nice family, and you think it's just about going to work and working hard and being known as a good guy or good gal, if you think it's that, you are missing God's purpose in the world for you. He has called you to be an ambassador. What I love about this church is there are a lot of people who are already asking the question, where is God working, and how can I join Him? I want to invite the rest of you to join me in asking that question. This morning, That's for most of you, if you're already a Christ follower. I just want to say, if you're not a Christ follower, what in the world are you waiting for? There is real hope and freedom, real transformation. Why not? There's nothing special about coming forward, but there is something special about you taking a step towards Jesus. Like really saying, I need you. Why not make today the day that you cross the starting line in a relationship with God and you say, I want freedom, I want to be transformed. Why not make today the day? We're going to sing a song, and it's Come As You Are, right, Chris? This is a great song for today. Just a song that says, come as you are. Because you don't need to be anything special. You just need to be transformed by the King of Kings. This morning, I know some of you are experiencing some incredible hurt. Some of you are experiencing some incredible pain. I want to invite you to come as you are up here. Folks can come pray for you. And let me just say, I know in a small town, it's hard to come forward and have everybody know that you need prayer. You know what I say? Boo on that. Who cares? Come forward, because we want to be the church. We want to surround you and gather around you and be ambassadors for Christ in your life. If you need prayer, come up this morning so people can come pray with you. And if you need to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and make Him the boss and the king of your life and follow Him in baptism through death in the waters, where you go under the water and it symbolizes you dying and you come back to new life, then good night. Come up here this morning and let's do it. Let's do it.